Although Avengers Endgame closed the door on some of our favorite original heroes like Iron Man and Captain America, it seems like the lovable Thor was poised for a brand new beginning. Sure enough, at Comic-Con, Marvel announced the upcoming Thor: Love and Thunder, and today's video is asking the important question, which villain is Thor going to smash with Stormbreaker next? Thor has an interesting rogue gallery that has yet to be fully explored, and we have reason to believe that villains like Enchantress, Gorr the God Butcher, and Mangog will all make their grand debuts in the fourth Thor. But how will that work? Well, let's get into that right now. Out of the main trio of Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, can you believe that Thor is the one who secured a fourth movie? Don't get us wrong, we love Thor now, but his first two movies weren't as well received as the other Avengers solo films. But all that changed with Thor Ragnarok, which gave the franchise a major facelift by tapping into Chris Hemsworth's natural comedic ability and replacing the previously heavy Shakespearean themes with a more goofy buddy cop tone. Seriously, if you watch the first Thor movie and then immediately watch the third Thor movie, be prepared for some total tonal whiplash. You'll notice things like Thor's bleached eyebrows. How did he get those? Did he go to some Asgardian beauty salon? These are the questions we need answered. Fine, actually we could probably skip over those things, but doesn't the idea of Thor getting his hair done at some fancy hair salon seem like something Taika Waititi would put in one of his Thor movies? So we're actually looking forward to the next Thor film, and we're more excited about it than we would be for an Iron Man 4 or a Captain America 4. How weird is that? If you told us a few years ago that the Thor franchise is surviving past Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, we would have thought Captain America smacked it too hard in the face with his shield, but here we are, ready to spend more time with Thor and his fellow Revengers. And as if we couldn't be more excited, wouldn't you know it, Marvel dropped a major bombshell when they announced the fourth Thor movie that blew all of our faces off. Not only was Taika Waititi returning to write and direct the new movie, which is fantastic news, but none other than Jane Foster will make her grand return to the franchise, and she will become worthy of wielding Mjolnir and becoming her own version of the hero, aka the Mighty Thor. Mind equals blown. Taika Waititi, you are a genius madman. So now we have a movie centered around Thor, Valkyrie, and Mighty Thor, which sounds epic and we can't wait. Briefly, let's mention where everyone ended up after the events of Avengers Endgame, just as a little refresher in case, our minds are still turned to mush after worrying for months about whether Spider-Man would be back in the MCU. Most importantly, after spending 3 movies struggling to become a worthy king, Thor gave that all up at the end of Avengers Endgame to jaunt off into parts unknown with the Guardians of the Galaxy in an attempt to find himself and go on new adventures. On one hand, that's sort of unfortunate because Thor's solo movies all follow the arc of Thor becoming worthy to be king of Asgard and finally obtaining that status at the end of Thor Ragnarok, only to be immediately attacked and destroyed and eventually sent into a deep depression full of pizza, beer, and cheese whiz thanks to the Mad Titan Thanos in Infinity War and Endgame. But he finally got his groove back, and we imagine Thor: Love and Thunder will be about the hero struggling to form a new identity for himself after moving on from what he thought was his true purpose. And although we severely want to see what his adventures with the Guardians will be like, we have a feeling we won't see a lot of that in the new Thor movie, besides possibly a cameo from a cheap star to get, like Groot or Rocket, to send him off on his merry way. But if you think he just abandoned the Asgardians to live mundane lives on Earth while he parties it up in space, well, that's actually not completely inaccurate, but he did leave the Asgardians in more than capable hands with Valkyrie, who is the new Queen of Asgard and will most likely have to adjust to that new role. We didn't see a lot of Valkyrie before or after the snap, but having her be Queen of Asgard is an interesting path for her, as the Valkyrie we knew in Thor Ragnarok was more of a loner who watched out for herself. How will she act now that she's in command of the entire remaining population of Asgard? On the bright side though, after countless attacks, their homeworld being destroyed and then most of them being slaughtered by Thanos, there has to be only 15 Asgardians left, right? But who we need a real refresher on is Jane Foster. For the longest time, it looked like Natalie Portman was done with the MCU. She didn't enjoy working on Thor: The Dark World due to some behind-the-scenes drama, and she was like the only cast member not to physically return for Avengers Endgame. So what happened to Jane? By the end of Thor: The Dark World, Thor had given up everything to live on Earth with Jane, but the two didn't get a happy ending. A quick line of dialogue in Thor Ragnarok mentioned how the world's most famous astrophysicist, aka Jane, dumped Thor. Although although Thor pushed back, saying it was a mutual dumping. We kinda doubt that's what happened. Yeah, we suspect Thor got dumped and ghosted hardcore. Filling in what Jane has been up to all this time will probably be a focal point of the new Thor movie, and it's going to be fascinating to see how she becomes worthy to wield Thor's hammer. So now, we have 3 awesome characters, and that much awesomeness needs some worthwhile villains to fight. That's why the rumor about the villains of Thor 4 has us so excited. Now, taken with a huge grain of salt, there's whispers that Enchantress will be the main villain of the movie, and Gorr the God Butcher will be the secondary villain. On top of that, there's even a third villain rumored for the movie, with Mangog also hinted at making his grand debut appearance. If it's all true, then our heroes are in for a serious fight. When all is said and done, we think Enchantress is most likely to be the main villain of the movie. And no, we're not suggesting that DC and Marvel are going to somehow combine in one big universe-melding fight, and Enchantress from Suicide Squad is going to hop franchises to fight Thor. In the Marvel universe, Enchantress is the alias for the goddess Amora, an immortal being with stunning beauty and the ability to cast powerful spells. So basically, her name is a double-edged sword. She can enchant you with her intoxicating beauty, and she can literally enchant you with spells. We could totally see someone like this factoring into Thor's story, and with some tweaks to her character, she could quite literally fit into where the Asgardians are now. By having Amora be an Asgardian obsessed with beauty and nice things, only to be living in a small town on Earth called New Asgard where most people are simple fishermen, it could lead to some drama and efforts to change the new status quo. She could lead her own uprising, which forces Valkyrie to turn to Thor and help stopping her. The Asgardians have been through so much recently, so by having the main villain directly tie into their current situation would be a smart move on the writer's part. While Amora is causing trouble for the Asgardians, Thor needs a fun adventure in space where he can really find himself, and we think pitting him against the relatively new villain known as Gorr the God Butcher would be an interesting task for the hero. At this stage, Thor isn't on some grand quest, but rather he just wants to go on adventures and help people. So imagine if he crossed paths with a god killer, and their meeting inspired Thor to begin his new mission of stopping Gorr. How does this relate to Jane? Well, for one, with Jane becoming her own version of Mighty Thor, she suddenly puts a target on her back as Gorr hunts down people like her, which means it's a story about Thor acting as a sort of mentor figure to Jane as she learns how to use Mjolnir, and Thor essentially passing the baton over to her, all while the two fight Gorr. But with rumors of a third villain being included, we have to expand our story even more. At some point, we could see Enchantress and Gorr teaming up to beat their enemies, and then using magic, they could summon the creature known as Mangog, which has a pretty nifty comic origin. In the comics, Mangog is the physical manifestation of the hatred of a billion beings from a race that was completely wiped out and slaughtered by Odin in his early days. Having a villain like this once again will force Thor to go up against his father's legacy and mistakes in order to become stronger than ever before. Thor Ragnarok sort of had Thor grapple with his father's legacy with Hela, but that was one element of the movie that was underserved, so now's the time to fix it. Having 3 main heroes and 3 main villains is actually great at the end, because each hero could face down a villain by themselves for the ultimate catharsis. Valkyrie could fight Enchantress to prove that she's worthy of being queen and leading the Asgardians in the right direction. Mighty Thor, Jane Foster, can fight Gorr because in this story we're speculating on, Gorr starts to hunt Jane because of her newfound abilities. So having Jane fight him at the end is representative of her becoming a true hero. And then you have Thor fight Mangog, who is the representation of his past and his father that he has to overcome in order to move on. All of these matchups just sound so narratively satisfying, right? And we're already casting in our heads. We could totally see someone like Christina Hendricks portray Enchantress, as she has the look of a seductress, but has proven that she can be sinister thanks to her voice work in Toy Story 4. Gorr would be an interesting role for any actor, so why not throw Keanu Reeves in there, as we know he can play Gorr as a ruthless, stone-cold assassin. It would finally get Keanu Reeves in the MCU, which has to happen sooner or later, right? And then Mangog can be mainly CGI, so why not get someone with a great voice to voice him, like Mark Hamill? Sure, why not? Now, of course, having this many villains is a risky move, On one level, it's great to have a movie where all three of your characters are fighting a different battle, as it gives everyone something important to do. We love all three of the characters that will be at the forefront of Thor: Love and Thunder, so we obviously don't want any character getting sidelined, but then again, having three villains runs the risk of underdeveloping all of them because there's simply not enough time. Call it the Spider-Man 3 effect, where you just cram in three villains and then no one gets enough screen time to be interesting. There are some workarounds to this. Maybe you could introduce Gorr or Enchantress in something like Loki's upcoming miniseries to start filling in their personalities a little before expanding their roles in Thor: Love and Thunder. And maybe you could have Mangog act like Surtur did in Thor Ragnarok, appearing in a small but pivotal role that doesn't take away from Hela's story at all. It's just one way to manage all the characters. But let's be honest, you don't really need three huge villains in the new movie, as the majority of the film will be made up of Thor and Jane's relationship, Jane's transition to Mighty Thor, and Valkyrie leading Asgard. That's a lot of stuff, and even though we probably wouldn't mind if the new Thor movie was like 3 hours long, we feel having too many villains runs the risks of derailing the story altogether. But at the end of the day, we trust Taika Waititi after what he did for Thor in Ragnarok. We have faith that he can deliver a worthy follow-up to one of the MCU's best movies, and if anyone could successfully work in three villains into one movie and give everyone enough screen time, it would be the guy who voices Korg. Out of all the villains that Thor and his friends could face in Thor: Love and Thunder, we really hope it's the ones that we mentioned. We think the Enchantress, Gorr, and Mangog could give our heroes a run for their money. What do you think? What villain do you want to see in the upcoming Thor movie? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more awesome MCU content. As always, thanks for watching.